Great. Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. It's great to be here today. I actually wear several professional hats. I say that to some people. I'm mostly wearing my open recognition advocate hat today to help expand your notions of recognition and its relationship with skills and digital credentials. But I must say, as said with Michael yesterday, being very impressed with what people are already talking about. So in some ways, I'm just echoing what has been said. I like to say that badges are about making recognition visible. So I'm going to give you a quick visual bio of me that includes a badge. I started in EdTech in the public sector, TV Ontario. I led the team that took them, I like to say, kicking and screaming onto the internet in the early 90s. I left TV Ontario to set up Learning Agents as an EdTech consultancy in about 2000. Our first big client was Red River College in Winnipeg, and Winnipeg is where I'm still based. I actually started a family there. And since then, Learning Agents has focused on career journeys, lifelong learning, the recognition of life-wide learning, first with e-portfolios and then with digital badges and micro-credentials since 2011. Along with the advocacy and consulting, we're the hosts of cancred.ca, leading Canadian digital badge and micro-credential platform, often working at universities that already have other badging platforms. But today's not about CanCred. I'll be talking about badges and micro-credentials in general, using examples from several platforms. That said, if you want to learn more about CanCred, well, let's do that. The logos you see are some of our clients wearing different hats. So service provider, consultant, advocate, and as evidence that we do drink our own champagne, I have a badge-based portfolio. And I invite you to check out my Open Recognition Ambassador badge representing the advocacy hat, which is the main reason I'm here today. We do work with many post-secondary institutions, but our perspective does go beyond admissions and credit transfer about other forms of recognition, so the life-wide part. So why are we talking about open recognition? Well, it's a VUCA world we're living in. It's volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex, it's ambiguous. We need agile development solutions if we're going to deal with that. We also need to think holistically and find the balance between skills and the application of skills. Communication for engineers is not the same as communication for marketers. So what I'm saying here is that this is a world that goes way beyond neat little skill boxes and prefabricated learning pathways, and I'll be hammering that point in the session. What are the skills? Well, World Economic Forum told us back in 2020 that half of our force will need retraining by 2025. But what skills will they need? Only one of them in this list is actually about technology, and discipline specific looks pretty lonely down there. Where are we? There we go. And similarly, only one of the skills for success is digital, and digital itself is changing fast as we speak. So let's talk more about more human ways to make recognition visible. First, we need to ask what the recognition's for. Certainly, it can support academic advancement, whether it's the recognition of credentials or the recognition of experiential learning, but there's more. What about jobs and careers? And there are other reasons that also may be valid for that individual at that point of their life. Maybe academic recognition is not the most important. It's always important, but not always necessarily the most important thing. I'm going to be talking a lot more about much more than academic recognition today. We all know experience is a good teacher, and that not all of us were lucky to make it through post-secondary, but all of us have picked up important knowledge that I like to call life-wide learning. Those skills deserve to be recognized and validated, and we have UNESCO supporting this. We also have CAPLA, the organization that I belong to, that's their manual for recognition of prior learning, and also CEDIFOP in Europe. I want to call out especially on the right here, the International Indigenous Recognition of Prior Learning. Ashley, who's still here, I think. FNTI was the cradle of CAPLA back in the 90s and essentially birthed it. And so Paul Zakos was on loan from Loyalist College for FNTI and brought in that notion of respect for other cultures that continues to this day. I was at their conference last year, and the Mapuche from Chile came, and there was an opening and a closing ceremony to the conference to indicate that respect. Because recognition is lifelong, it's life-wide, it's about more than assessment, it's about belonging. The words on the slide on the left there come from a keynote by Ted Fleming. I like to call him Father Ted at the VPL Biennale last May. VPL is an international term for validation of prior learning, otherwise known as RPL. But Ted took the audience way beyond the notion of academic recognition and made it a human thing. So these pictures of Indigenous peoples are from right here in Canada. We're very proud of Wab Kinew in Manitoba, our First Nations premier. The picture on the right is from his swearing-in ceremony as premier. And there's a little story in there because Murray Sinclair is down there in the bottom left. He's the guy who led the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. He's looking on while Wab's uncle places his father's war bonnet on his head. So this also is life-wide recognition. Note the many references to others, not just the individual. Recognition is about social connection, it's about co-creation. And the open recognition community I belong to has been developing these notions collaboratively for over 20 years. I like to say it's a very sad story, but I took my wife on her honeymoon to an ePortfolio conference. So I'm still married. So at its best, recognition is a holistic process that helps individuals develop their identities in relation to other people and the contexts that surround them. So this is my adaptation of something that was done last year at the Badge Summit by Philippe Petitqueux, who's this week, actually coming up next week, is at the Open Badge Forum in France. Big deal over there. Basically, it takes us, again, way beyond skills and credit. Recognition starts from within. How do you see yourself? Who are you? Where did you come from? Where do you want to go? Moving out from there, who are you close to? Your family, your friends, your community, your team at work. Further out, what kind of institutions or other organizations do you need to be accepted by in order to meet your goals, whether those are in career or life? And this is where most of the aspects of CPL, formalized RPL, are. The yellow text indicates something else here, the notion of a learning organization, a recognition of a learning organization, because people don't just do things by themselves, they do them with others. That's how things get done. So moving beyond broader social identities, race, gender, social group, etc. At the furthest level, do we recognize Mother Nature as a living thing? If so, do we see that Mom's hair is on fire? So the Indigenous concept of all my relations, that includes the 7 generations before and the 7 generations to follow. So these are all contexts for basically developing, oops, sorry, is that working? There we go. Developing and recognizing your own identity. So there were minds that moved when Philippe did that in a workshop at the Badge Summit. It was really powerful. And it was just him sketching on a whiteboard. So whether or not this moves people, I did my best. Can technology help? Well, it depends. When Open Badges came out in 2011, I was quite pumped. I'd been working with ePortfolio since 2003 as a way of showing what you know and can do. And from life experience, I was getting a little frustrated with them because it was the learning portfolio, what I like to call academic torture chambers, that students couldn't wait to escape and drop because it was too much work, too much reflection for credit, like sock puppetry, and too monolithic. It was basically for the institution. So all of a sudden, there's Mozilla, with an inclusive, accessible, progressive way of making learning and achievement visible, an ePortfolio 1 byte at a time. And that's me presenting it to CAPLA in 2012, the same year I brought badges to the EPIC conference. I was pretty buzzed about it, as you can tell. Once academic institutions learned about this, there was this term called micro-credentials that emerged. And after all, it's no surprise to the current audience, credentialing is part of the DNA of colleges and universities, and they see big opportunities in the modularity, the stackability of micro-credentials as a junior tier in a credentialing platform. There's been lots of discussion about the definition of micro-credential, including here, several variations have been put forward. The current working definition from UNESCO captures a lot of the current themes. I was one of about 45 international experts who contributed. Beverly Oliver ran it. And I was one of the few outside the education sector. I think there were about 2 or 3 of us from Canada. One element that's not there is the notion of workplace relevance, which appears in most definitions. So the eCampus Ontario principles and framework include workplace relevance, for example. And many government fundings encourage partnerships between education and industry to make micro-credentials relevant to workplace needs. Beyond micro-credentials, though, we still have a need for Mozilla's original vision. Flexible ways to recognize life-wide learning and achievement to make a difference in people's lives that might have credit attached or not. That includes informal learning and even informal recognition. After all, most of the learning we do is informal. We should have better ways of recognizing and leveraging it. I made this point during the launch event for UNESCO. That was my little 60 seconds of fame. I continue to make that point every chance I get. So I'll be talking about informal badges later in this presentation. The key takeaway here is that the open badges is this flexible container. It's a standard that can include formal and informal digital credentials. I mean, micro-credential doesn't always have to be in an open badge, but very often it is. Basically, what's important is the credential should describe itself and the claim it's making and provide support for that claim as appropriate. Every year there's a new version of this diagram, and I've seen about 4 or 5 of them, and every year I think it's a little bit ahead of itself. This is about how micro-credentials or learning and employment records, as they're called here, are supposed to help link people, skills, and jobs. I do learn a lot from Ian Davidson's work at Smart Resume, but I just don't see things playing out quite like this. Is this skills first? Is this technologies first? And why not human first? So do we really think that skills are supplied, packaged, and consumed by employers in a logically constructed ecosystem like a circuit board? Not according to a lot of the research out there. Overall, the consensus is that there's way too much about new hires versus upskilling current workers, too much emphasis on large employers who can afford the fancy technology, or even institutions like FNTI we were just hearing, and too much on teaching skills over developing them in workplace application and performance. So basket weaving, there was something that came out of that experience. People learned about the land. Way too little on cultural change at the company level. All the talk about modular skills programming and micro-credential stacking is making me think about Lego, not in a good way. So is this really what we're after? Could we do it in a more human way? On the top right, what do you remember from that RISE course you took 6 weeks ago, whether it was assessed or not? On the bottom right, what if you've acquired this hot new skill, but you have no way to apply it back in your workplace because your employer doesn't even know what you're talking about? So Mozilla made it clear that learning is not only lifelong, it's life-wide, and most useful learning happens in the wild, outside the classroom, informal, usually unstructured, sometimes working with others, sometimes by ourselves. As we work, we get things done and try and be better. These examples slot into a well-known reference model. Somebody mentioned the name just the other day. Alan Tuff, thank you. Some people like to quibble about the exact percentages, and they can vary based on context, but most of us agree about the basic point. Training programs are only a small part of the learning that we need to do to be able to perform effectively. Often might be a great way to start with newbies, but you need more. So open badges were such a simple, flexible way to capture life-wide learning and share it on. Trouble is, they were also a convenient, glossy container for micro-credentials to repackage Con Ed into industry-relevant credentials, which fed into notions about luring students into larger programs with credential stacking, which adds to complexity and friction and other unintended consequences. I blogged about this, so I'll stop now. I continue to maintain the reason we're talking about micro-credentials today is because of the invention of open badges in 2011, and open badges get almost no recognition for that. Micro-credentials have certainly gotten more out of the relationship than open badges. It's a little known fact, but I actually played the role of micro-credential in a mock trial at the 2022 EPIC conference in Lille, where I was being sued by my estranged sister, Open Badges, for identity theft. A little bit of recognition theater. So, yeah. So, it's become a bit too much about credentials, not enough about human narratives and connections. I mean, really, how well does verifiable skills technology map to our current culture and processes, especially for small employers who make up the vast bulk of our economy? How much do they really count for careers today? We've had diplomas and certificates. They're often table stakes and even course filters for hiring. We now have badges and micro-credentials, but do these really answer questions like this? Aren't employers still relying on stuff like this, and this, and this, and this? These are methods that are often combined and triangulated, especially as small employers try and work out what the candidate can do for them. So it's less about a verifiable skills retrospective, more about building a story for potential performance for an unknown future. That's agile. So credentials alone don't tell your story. It remains a more relational human connection. It's changing with technology, and I'm certainly one of the ones trying to change things along with the rest of you. But it's not changing that fast. We need to be aware of that fact. So I think I've seen this. That's a double. Never mind. So go to this one. So I just want to talk about pathways. I won't spend a long time on it, but this is somebody's Oh, I'm sorry.
Wrong. That's all.
Oh, okay. Go. So yeah, learning pathways, micro-credential stacking, I like to say it's catnip for some. We like to organize and rationalize things, but we need to understand our logical constructs don't tell the whole story and may not be the best way to help learners develop, especially diverse learners. Sometimes, instead of prescribing, we should maybe be describing and curating and repurposing the learning we already have, or helping our learners do that and recognizing that for them, with them. Because what if there's more than one pathway, one more way through the maze? What if it's a constellation, lots of choices? What if it's a desire path that wasn't preconceived? Nan, I asked her permission about this yesterday. She said, no, that's fine. As long as I'm not swearing, you can quote me. So basically, I don't, she has been working on this for decades. The credential as you go, I want to call that out and say that it's not just prior learning, it's also external learning. In fact, Nan is now saying basically just recognition of learning. Susan actually referred to this yesterday. This is the nomological network. So that red circle indicates what the institution's interested. The entire subject is somewhat represented by what's there, and it actually goes off the screen. So we only actually recognize what we cherish in institutions. What if the institution could learn from the individual? So I don't see a lot of recognition and learning and achievement outside of courses in a lot of the micro-credential frameworks out there. Here's a sampling of some of the better known frameworks international across Canada, split into PLAR, what we call PLAR. So RPL, you have the PLAR, and then the articulation and transfer. I've coined a term, I'm not sure it'll fly, but it's micro-credential recognition, articulation, and transfer. So McRAT. We'll see how that goes. Here's just my sort of high level setup here. So it's difficult to be recognized with a micro-credential that's not related to a course. Very few examples of that out there. And that said, there's a better record from people like BC. So BC just updated theirs, and Susan mentioned that, there's she wishes some things were different, but what's good about this is that they've actually defined RPL and whether it's for credit or not, and also that left open the possibility of it being convertible to credit, which is very important. This is one I just discovered. Université Sainte-Anne actually has a plarable foundation badge that's part of a learning pathway. So you can at least get started if you're I forget what it is. It's a dialogue person, somebody standing up for a community, somebody who advocates for a community, and it's a learning pathway they have for that. So a lot of people have good experience with that, might as well recognize that and say, okay, let's build on that. Okay, so this was about the Declaration of Paris, so let's talk about that. There was a crying need for a broader perspective, and I've been learning about it since 2004. So last year at the EPIC 2024, it led to the Paris Declaration. Here it is. And it's about the equality of recognition, sometimes expressed with an S to emphasize its diversity and the fact that it's an English and French thing. So the reconnaissance with an S. So different types of recognition, formal, non-formal, or what my colleague Serge likes to call semi-formal, as sort of an in-between kind of a state, and informal. We could spend probably a day talking about these principles and how they work together, and I invite you to come to the next EPIC conference, and you can, in October 21 to 23. And I actually encourage you to check it out at your leisure and sign it if you would like to support it. There's the link right there. Some key points here is that just as informal learning is not an inferior form of learning, informal recognition is not necessarily an informal form of recognition. Sometimes it can be more important. And the equality is not about saying this is like this, it's about to say we need all of this in order to have the complete picture. And it's about recognizing the richness and the complementarity. As for signing it, you'll notice some familiar faces there. I was actually looking for Joanne again. I couldn't see her. She was there. She signed it, but some people might recognize Melanie Gottlieb and a few other people. I think I see Nan there as well. So a lot of very committed people have signed it, and I encourage everyone to sign it and use some of the principles for your benefit. So I'm just going to show you some examples of this kind of thing in action. Hopefully I have time. How am I doing for time? I ended up restarting. So, okay, great. Stella Porto, the Inter-American Development Bank, we worked with them to develop a sort of a framework for recognition. This is for professional learning of professionals who work on intergovernmental projects across Latin America and the Caribbean. So for sort of a white collar recognition scheme, and it's within an environment where there's not a huge amount of trust, so we weren't able to go full open, but we basically were able to introduce some ideas. So we developed a taxonomy, which actually includes organizations. So an organization, instead of having just an MOU that sits on a shelf, it's a commitment on the part of the organization to do something that can be kept alive, sort of a living MOU. Some other things to highlight. Flexible recognition badges are for emergent and customizable ways to recognize achievements. They can start ad hoc and then develop into a new category over time. More recently, Stella has created these applied learning badges to recognize something they call the MIRA framework that was actually on the C3 webinar series. For those who know about that, she was featured there. Basically, when you finish a course, you make a commitment to apply your learning in some way, and then some later point you have a retrospective to say, how did I apply it? What happened serendipitously as a result of this learning and our application of it. So they've developed community of practice badges as well for individuals, and badges for the organizations in the community. So it's pretty inclusive when it comes to recognition channels, even though it's designed mostly for professionals. We have a public framework that's out there, and also we wrote a white paper to back it up. Moving on from that, we work with the Adult Education Association for Franco, Ontario, and this is skills recognition based on workplace evidence. They are a workforce that typically lacks formal qualifications. They developed a system to professionalize their members across the province. They started with a community co-created competency framework, and then they set it up for recognition. There's a badge application process where they say, I think I have this skill at this level. Here's my evidence of that, and here's somebody who has seen me doing it. And the badges are issued based on that. And then they can sort of build them up. So somebody who would come in as an admin assistant could show that they have some leadership capabilities, could show that they're able to become a facilitator even, or eventually a director of one of these agencies. And the idea is to provide that sort of career progression, upskilling within the sector. So these are the kinds of badges that happen. The 3 stars indicate the 3 levels, sort of Dreyfus idea. Then based on projects like this, this is a somewhat simplified slide, so I'm going to spare you all the examples, but we've developed a flexible framework for people to develop badges based on different kinds of learning and experience and demonstration of skill. First, it's a formal to non-formal spectrum. It's split between the presence and absence of summative assessment, what some people might call the border of rigor. For these high-level badge types that run from formal to informal, they provide maybe assurance or maybe just awareness. The stacking is there. I'm not against stacking. I'm just against stacking into big macro credentials. I think obviously you can have learning pathways, and as long as they're not too long. And these are essentially the concepts. And the arrows there show that these are indicative. They're not prescriptive. They're just based on what's been observed, but you can have some things morphing into other things, or characteristics of something over here being here. It's just intended to guide people in terms of thinking about what they want to recognize. So they are here, and often it's good to indicate visually, have a visual language that supports your badges. So some people have seen a number of examples of that to say, okay, this one has assessment. I can tell by looking at it, and let me look inside to find out more about it. So these are the principles that support that. So the certification, for example, is not just you completed a summative exam. It's you can be depended on to fulfill a particular role or task based on the certification. Somebody's certifying your ability. And this is just it in action. We work with Jeremy McQuigg. I was saying to Jeannie that he'll be joining us on the workshop happening over the summer about credential articulation and transfer. Very vocal person, I'll warn you in advance, but he has a work-based learning system and that he's basically applied this for his purpose. That was actually for the Ottawa mission. So that's working with NEETs, typically adults not in employment, education, or training, and it's a way of bringing them into the workforce. Just to show it's not all about us and CanCred, I want to call it the Scottish Credential and Qualifications Framework. Really good example of how qualifications frameworks and the learning that's important can be applied in the workplace and how to bring employers into that. So it starts with the qualifications framework. They work with other organizations that might be volunteer organizations, et cetera, and they help employers be inclusive recruiters by using the SCQF to come up with appropriate language for the level of skill that they're looking for a particular job. So instead of saying non-BAs need not apply, it says, okay, we need people who can do these types of things in these types of contexts, and they're helped to do that. So that's just an example at SCQF level 8. And that's based on the European framework. They map to the European framework. And that's something that the Australian system, for example, also does. The AQF maps to the EQF in a similar way. So Big Finish, I'm a fan of broadcast news. I kind of like it. It's just something I delivered in a UN webinar hosted by ILO back in 2023. It still holds up, I think. It relates to the needs for systems level thinking, but also thinking holistically. So you've got lifelong learners who are trying to develop themselves and get somewhere. You've got employer organizations who are trying to survive, trying to develop talent pipelines, trying to get better as organizations. You've got educators and trainers hopefully helping that system, bringing people into the system in various ways that are relevant to the needs of learners and employers. You've got governments and funders wanting people to be happy, wanting people to be prosperous, wanting to show an impact, a positive impact. And so what you have is sort of a supply of human potential and demand for capabilities. And hopefully you have a way of negotiating that with a combination of structured data standards that we've been talking about here, but also a way of dealing with the unstructured data, the messy middle that Wendy Palmer likes to talk about from Australia. So just to say that, switching my hat, Learning Agents, we just took a large step in this direction through a partnership with Edelex and SkillsAware out of Australia, bringing middleware connectivity, dynamic evidence collection, a database of over 60,000 skills definitions, and AI-based diagnostics to support recognition as a conversation. And that's all I'll say about it for now, but I just had to say that because we are working on it. So back to the advocate hat. If you're interested in exploring open recognition further, I invite you to the next EPIC conference in Paris this October. EPIC has been ground zero for open recognition since ePortfolio back in 2003 and open badges starting in 2011. We're currently seeking contributions. This was recently extended to June 30th. So if you want to be part of the conversation, we'd welcome you. But if you just want to hang out and talk, you have some really good conversations. And because we're all lifelong learners, and we should be drinking our own champagne, I encourage you to capture any learning you may have achieved in this session by reflecting on it to request this badge, which will include a link to the presentation itself, a bit of a learning capsule for you. That's all the time I've got. Yes. Yep. Thank you. We got time for questions?
Yes, and I want to invite our online people as well if you have any questions. And I would like to just add, Don and I deliberately with Sarah chatted about trying to ensure a way for travel cost savings. If people go to EPIC, the very next week is the GDN in Oslo. So we're trying to do more things like that and are deepening our conversations with EPIC, exploring an MOU and the like. And we're very proud to have signed the Paris Declaration. And I encourage all of you to do it. You're doing that work already. It's just simply acknowledging some of the principles so that you can be part of a larger voice. But it's very easy to go from Paris to Oslo. It's very easy to get into Paris from here and from other parts of Canada and the US. And you can create a whole trip together. So any questions? And I'd like to start with online just to give those folks a chance. Is there anything in the online that somebody wants to comment or ask? We'll just give them a second. If you raise your hand, we will open up the mic for you. So I'm not seeing anything. And so now we're going to cast to the tables here in the room. Anybody have a comment? Like, I have a question for all of you, maybe a show of hands. Is any of this a surprise to you? Yes? So does this, I see somebody, Mike, you're doing this back and forth. Explain that to us so I understand.
Well, surprise is not, I'm not surprised, but it's definitely very informative. Like I learned quite a bit just watching you go through all of this. And I particularly, I think I've seen the slide before, but the one where you have the Lego man up there with the different,
Oh, David Porter has used it.
Yeah, the Frankenstein. Yeah, that one has always resonated for me because I have been guilty in the past of saying, well, micro credentials are like a piece of Lego. You build upon it and build a credential, and it's obviously much more than that, much more nuanced than that. So I appreciate your presentation.
Appreciate it.
Anybody else have a comment? Wayne.
So yeah, a couple of thoughts. The first thing that kind of struck me was the slide that went from the personal to the universal. And that for me was like the chakras. It was like the chakras for learning throughout life, going from your base chakra all the way up to your seventh. So that was that was really meaningful to me. But what really struck me was the nomological network that sort of suggests a construct validity, and how to actually empirically create concepts, putting them together. And those things are not institutional. These things are deeply personal. They're deeply inventive. They're part of your character. They're part of your creativity, personality. And you're basically inventing your own learning throughout life. And hopefully those are the things that make the world a better place, in my opinion. Okay. And that makes me think about something that has been occurred to me over like the last year, and that is a Spotify playlist. Everybody has a Spotify playlist, maybe more than one, probably 10. And people can join and follow you, and you can start a jam and add more songs, delete songs. I think we need Spotify playlists for learning pathways.
I think you're onto something there, because I was about to add that it's not just individual, it's social. You do it with other people, and you went to that.
And by putting my learning or my recognition or my construct or my concept onto my learning pathway, which is my Spotify playlist for my life, other people can follow me and join in with me.
Right.
So as I get one of these open recognition explorations, someone can come in and whatever the version is, give a thumbs up or whatever that might be.
Yeah,
the social media for this.
Right. One slide that didn't make it into this presentation is one for the civics credentialing system in the US from Team Democracy, who are trying to get people to talk more politely across the aisle. And it's for citizens, it's for politicians, it's for people who work in elections, etc. And a lot of it is a declaration of values and getting people to endorse that and say that I can listen. I may not agree with you, but I can listen. Judy.
Hi, Don. Thanks for this presentation. Don and I work together on the CAPLA board, and I've never seen you present before, and I'm super inspired by you, as I always am when we're in meetings. But I have a question from a institutional perspective, because I loved the visualization around how only 10% of our learning is done in that formal setting. Many of us here are working in that 10%. So my question is, how can organizations like yours, or just like PCCAT, like CAPLA, all of these organizations, how can we help institutions with the mechanisms that are needed to recognize all of this learning in our very formal settings? I know PLAR is definitely on the radar for pretty much everyone now, which is fantastic from my CAPLA hat perspective. But there's those challenges, those systemic challenges, and I mean like systems, actual challenges, but also just, the way we think about learning from a college, university, polytechnic, Indigenous learning perspective. I actually think the Indigenous learner colleges will do much better than us at this, but just any thoughts that you might have.
Well, some of them might be naive because I haven't worked in your environment, but it occurs to me that focusing on outcomes rather than content would be a good place to start and say, these are the outcomes we want you to achieve. How do you want to get there? And build it as you go. So picking up on the credential as you go, this would be, what is it, stack it?
So in the framework that we developed, those are they're pulled out in order to describe, but they're all interrelated. So really thinking about not only where do you want to go, but what else is in relationship to that.
So it's that the advisory thing. So guide on the side, if I can say that. Yeah. I know it's a cliche.
Thank you, Don. My name is Becca. I'm Tawar Kiladze. I've been in a field of formal credential recognition for 23 years. And then I got a chance to go to EPIC conference in 2023. And I've met Don, and I've met Serge, and I've met Nan, and I met some other fascinating people there. It was a transformative experience for me. It was an emotional experience as well. What I came back with an understanding that, and again, being in an organization that's all about formal qualification recognition, and we've done some amazing work, and we'll hear a little bit after the break. I did get resistance in my community talking about the informal, non-formal credentials. When I talk to my European colleagues, there's more understanding there because of the UNESCO's reach and UNESCO's impact in our space. Lisbon Recognition Convention was a game changer. Global Recognition Convention hopefully will be another game changer because the Global Recognition Convention is talking about what Don has mentioned, right? It takes into consideration all learning matters. When I came back after that conference and I've started talking about these concepts in my ecosystem, there's still a hierarchy. And I had a little bit of a conversation here on my table. There's a bit of a hierarchy, and Don and the team at EPIC talks a lot about it, that the formal qualifications in this knowledge hierarchy are above everything. And that's how we kind of operate. However, business and employers are figuring it out first than everybody else. And people are being hired now for other skills and competencies as opposed to only formal qualifications. My point being here and thinking about these concepts, it's not one or the other, it's both. And these lifelong learning concepts that we're talking about, it will help us in our systems, in our ecosystems, to start recognizing, becoming aware of what we are talking about what it means in formal and non-formal learning. Thank you, Don.
That's a great way of summarizing. Thank you very much, everybody.
So Donna, I just want to say thank you so much on behalf of the GDN and PCCAT for being here today. I learn so much from you every time I hear you speak. And what I also love is how so much of what you do is embedded in the global recognition that we talked about at the front of this convening. And it's also in the already ratified by the Canadian federal government, Lisbon Recognition Convention. So we have the international instruments, and we have that at the federal level. So what always strikes me is the path to learning, the path to engaging our faculty and our academic leaders in our institutions to also join us in thinking about the art of the possible. You called out Nan as an example, and there's other faculty member in the ecosystem, including in Canada. I think we just need to work a little harder, stretch the muscles farther, and bring them into the team and learn from them, et cetera, to help with some of what Becca's saying. I just want to mention we are going a bit late, but I want to say thank you, Dawn. Round of applause.